Okay, everybody, thank you for coming to Dr. Doug's YouTube channel. I'm so excited as part of my work to be introducing to you some of the majorly important people in my life personally, but also in our LGBTQ movement who have done so much and are really heroes. And I'm so excited to share with you a little bit about our work with Dr. Costine, who is an important figure in the LGBT community in many, many ways, some of which I don't even know. But I think for me, we'll talk a little bit more together as we go, but I think the most sort of interesting child that we created together was the LGBT Specialization in Clinical Psychology at Antioch University. Lauren worked very, very hard with others to make sure that program, the first of a kind in the country, is an enormous success, and has been an important psychotherapist, clinical psychologist, author of an important book, Lesbian Love Addiction, about which she'll speak very shortly, is writing a new book, and just maybe a little brief intro to get us started. So let's have our interview, and let's see, Dr. Lauren, is there anything else you would like to add about your bio for viewers to know?
Oh, sure. Well, I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been in the field now from the beginning for almost 25 years. It happened after I got sober. So I got sober, and 10 months later I was in grad school.
Wow.
So it was an incredible initiation, in a sense that I had this awakening that was very profound after being deep, dark into substance use. And all of a sudden I was like, not only do I have to figure out why I'm such a mess, but I want to also be able to be a part of the healing component, and just dove in. And
I think it's so wonderful that people know. I think it's very important. I think you and I would agree that people who are watching understand that those of us who are healers and treaters are not perfect individuals. We come with our own trauma, our own stories, our own journeys, our own achievements. So I'm just so honored that you can talk about, getting sober and
yeah, I really related to the wounded healer archetype. That was just, and I came from essentially a very okay seeming family on the outside,
right.
But I'm now realize I'm a highly sensitive person, which there's a third of the population is, and that part of me met this environment which was repression of feelings, a lot of shaming to use for parenting and control, and that to me was extremely traumatic.
Yes.
So maybe it wasn't for my brother,
right.
But for me, by the time I hit adolescence, I was a mess.
Yeah, for sure.
And
being a woman and all that.
Yeah, being a woman and being a lesbian, but not knowing that at the time, but growing up in a very conservative environment. Not religious at all.
Interesting.
But highly capitalistic.
Right.
And it was all about making money and how you look, and how does everybody perceive you, and not being judged, and so I went out in the world, and I found alcohol and drugs, and that was how I coped for a very long time. I stayed high functioning, thank goodness. I got my undergrad. It was I was able to cope.
Right.
But at the end of the day, when I got sober, I was like, wow, I got a lot of healing to do. I didn't know that it would actually be this lifelong journey. But I'm not afraid to do or try anything that's involved with healing, and I'm sort of mostly
so true.
Interested in it, It's oh, is that a new modality? Okay, let me check that out. I'll try it, And so that's, I think, really helped me clinically as well, because then I have a lot in the toolbox to offer folks when they work with me. I'm like, well, hey, I think this, intuitively that's sounding really good for you.
So I think also we'll talk a little bit more about it, how important it is, I think, for clinicians to have access to different tools. Obviously, starting yourself as a person and engaged in your own healing was a big, education
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like going through graduate school and then the doctoral program, that itself is also healing,
Right.
especially if you see it in that way and you use it as a part of your inner work,
Right.
as well as getting educated on how you're going to help and use it with others, and sort of when you use that in tandem, it's extremely powerful, I think. And
I think that's important for a lot of also maybe early therapists to hear how important in tandem that is, to make sure you're doing your own work.
Yeah, right. And so, and at the end of the day, when I say like, this works, like I'm coming from an authentic place.
Yeah.
Like I'm coming from a place of feeling more and more healed and more joy, more and more inner peace, more and more like inner space to just sort of like live in life and all of its challenges and have like this capacity to be okay when there's like, a world that's always in kind of a sort of chaos,
Right.
And that is direct result of this work.
That's fantastic. You're like when you say it works, you have your own professional training, but your own personal experience to back it up.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so important. That I think patients know that, whether you tell it to them or not, when you're talking to them.
I agree.
They
can tell.
Right. Are you like, were you capping me, or is this something you know a bit about? And they feel it immediately.
They do feel it immediately. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit, I want to ask you two questions quickly. I want to know a little bit about your own coming out process, because I think that's interesting. And then I wanted to talk about what it was like to develop the LGBT specialization.
Okay, I love it. So, my coming out journey hasn't always been the easiest thing for me to discuss, because there's like some shame around it still sometimes, because I came out late. And I'm an outlier in the way I came out. And so I had a bisexual identity for a long time. And I think because of my background, not being religious, but being very much about like how you look and how you present, having very lesbian phobic mother, it had such an impact on me. Like I was so wrapped in making her happy, and it was extremely unconscious for such a long period of time that I kept trying to, I was out by, but I kept trying to be straight, basically, in a sense. But it was so uncomfortable. I never married. I didn't have kids. I didn't do that traditional thing. Like that felt so confining.
Right.
And, didn't really.
You couldn't cross over to that.
No, I didn't go in that. I wasn't that unconscious, but there was like these nuances of and a lot of repression that I was really unaware of. And it was so related to the complex relationship that most of us have with our moms, right? And mine was with her. And it took a lot of work, and it was really...
I knew you when you were going
You knew me. You were very much there from the beginning, and I kept trying, to put the round peg in a square hole. I kept trying to do that, and was just, miserable about it, and but very tenacious. And so...
That you are.
And on top of it, being sober, so, it's harder to find community in the queer community when you're sober. There's like a whole other component of that.
Point. Right. Everybody likes to party.
Right, and I stopped going to bars a super long time ago. So, and then on top of it, when I came out, I think this is a very important piece. Culturally, this was the 80s. So I'm born in the 60s. The 80s is the era of the backlash. It was the era of like, we're going to come back hard on the strides the feminist movement's made, strides the gay liberation movement's made, strides on civil rights. And I came into the world where the male gaze was still coveted. My currency was how I looked. That's how my parents really praised me. It wasn't so much like, I did get a lot of praise for doing well in school and being all of that, but it was more like, well, Lauren, you look so beautiful, or,
That's
so
a really interesting thing, really for women especially, I think.
For women, and I do a lot of deep dive on this because I was so insecure, so any gaze
Right.
was like, okay, I'm worthy.
Yes.
I'm worthy. And I
That
really
is.
fell into that vacuum, if you will, in a sense that's not really a lot of lesbian stories, you
Right.
know, necessarily, right? So I'm seeing a lot more femmes come out. So I'm, you know, I
It's
think
happening.
for us, it was like, and I know I've seen more, all kinds of gender expressions get married and get sucked into the hetero world before they come out. But for the femmes, it's like the expectation that you're heterosexual
Right.
is like, you know, compounded, right?
By the
And then-
by the family, by the society, by the queer community too.
Yeah, because when I came out when I sort of came out as bisexual in the 80s, first of all, bisexuality was, you know, not good.
Not looked well upon by
Right.
anybody.
You know, you weren't really invited into the community
Right.
if you were identifying as that or sort of struggling with however you were. And then femmes were not.
Right.
In the 80s, for some reason, being a femme was like not a good thing.
Right.
So here I am, this highly sensitive person, extremely insecure. I'm trying to kind of dip my toe in the community. Women are scary, lesbians are scary, I'm very intimidated, and then no one's welcoming. It was
Right.
like, and I have this rejection sensitivity anyway, so it was like, okay,
Right.
let me just sort of live as this outlier,
Right.
keep following sort of how I am. I mean, I had girlfriends. It wasn't like I'm one of these ones that didn't have same-sex relationships,
Right.
but they were closeted and they were messy. And so anyway, then I started doing the affirmative work.
Yes.
And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I am such a proponent
Yes.
is meeting you and getting involved in the specialization and working on my own internalized homophobia
Yes.
was a game changer
Yes.
and literally saved me. And through that, I was able to realize, oh my gosh, I am a lesbian. I love this identity. I've thrown out all the shame. And then I was one of those that's like, well, because that's who I am, let's go. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I'll pick it with you. I'll do whatever it takes, you know,
Oh, I'm so excited. Well, I wonder if you could unpack a little bit more what you mean about the affirmative. I know we can spend hours and hours on that. And then also a little bit what you mean by lesbian, which I think we can spend hours and hours on that. And then a little bit of what you mean by internalized homophobia.
Okay, so for me, the main points of affirmative approach was learning what heterosexism was, which was, you know, the only ways of being in relationship in this world that we live in is being in a hetero marriage, having a couple kids, having the white picket fence, having a dog, and then like procreating and living in that family unit.
Right.
And that's it. And that's like the only thing that's valued.
Right.
It's the only thing that I saw as a kid in the 70s on any media. And so the brainwashing was really intense and
Really
severe.
intense.
And
Still like that?
right. And there was no talk of it. I mean, there was like, I remember one time we went and I grew up outside of New York City in New Jersey, and we went to the West Village, and you know, my uneducated parents were saying like, I think the handkerchief means this if it's in the left pocket, and like that's about
my
the
God.
game, and you know, like
Oh my God.
no one knew what they were talking about.
Right.
I, of course, was fascinated,
Right.
but, you know, I didn't have anyone to discuss it with. So
No.
the other piece, I think, what was really important was, you know, this homophobic environment that we're all growing in, the shame, the hatred, the vitriol, the, like, negativity towards anything of same-sex orientation, same-sex loving. I knew that was out there. I didn't know that I had also internalized it.
Right.
And then, so the internalization of this, that component that we work in with the affirmative piece
Right.
was key for me, because then I realized that I was turning this on myself.
Right, it's important, really important.
And then I was feeling very afraid to be an out lesbian, out person, you know, just like that terrified me. Like if I was by and kind of in the shadows and sort of like basically living in the hetero world for the most part, but dipping my toe a little bit into the queer world sometimes.
Much
like
less threatening. Yeah.
A lot less threatening for me.
Right.
Yeah, and it just seemed like I was sort of dancing around
Sure.
it all, but I didn't have to commit to really anything, and I think that was exactly how I coped.
It's completely understandable given, what you're talking about is the saturation of all this bigotry and, layers and layers of mystifying heteronormativity. It's amazing any of us really
come out at all. Yeah,
At all.
Yeah, exactly. So that was those are the main pieces for me that the affirmative, but it's that piece of understanding like why it's so hard to come out or be a healed queer person, right? Or a healed, like it's, these things, even if you are out, that stuff can still be in there. So my process of being able to come out was doing the healing and then getting to this other place. But you can come out and then not healed any of that and still have all of that.
That's a really important point that
being affecting you.
People I don't think they quite understand. And maybe even a lot of therapy doesn't quite understand that you can come out, but that there's layers of hidden negative thought or depressive feeling or certain levels of anxiety that we're calling, let's say, undiagnosed internalized homophobia. So even if you're out and proud and even on the streets, there's, at least from our perspective, I think, more psychological work that could get done.
Right, and the thing that was so important, I think what we were doing at the specialization was helping therapists learn how to do that directly in the room and not waiting for the client to bring it in, but starting to help them link that this could be part of what's affecting their self-esteem and their sense of self and loving themselves and feeling worthy and competent. And that let's look at that piece. It's not all of it, but it's a very important piece of the pie that when you're an affirmative therapist, you directly bring in.
Right.
Because nobody knows it, so no one's going to bring it in.
Oh my God, what an important point. I know myself these days doing therapy, I'm not going to ask the client a million questions because the answers may or may not know. Let's have a conversation. And let's have a conversation is, I think, a whole other different way. I think it's an affirmative way. A little bit more of egalitarianism instead of, tell me, why do you feel that way? Let's talk about why this might be the case. Give me a little bit, how did you grow up? Where were you in Alabama?
Yes.
And you're wondering why you are so angry with your partner now. Let's bring it in like right away, or as soon as we can, because people are, closed off to the bigger context.
Right, exactly. And then they don't even know where these triggers are coming from. Right, and tracing it back to the origin is a big part of the affirmative approach. It's very psychodynamic in that way. It's like, let's go back to your childhood, And, for me, I didn't have any big T's till I got older, but the little T's were so tremendous. And that's also something that someone can brush aside. Yeah. So were you not seen and understood as a child? And were you not appreciated if you were different? And how was homophobia and heterosexism sort of discussed or not discussed in your home? And what messages did you marinate in that you have no idea about that are now impacting you? You are in your relationship, for instance, and what are you projecting onto your partner through your triggers that you're completely unaware of?
That was a beautiful, simple, you didn't even look at any notes. Nice simple rundown of some of the ways that the psychodynamic / affirmative approach married to LGBTQ identity issues kind of work in terms of questions get asked, conversation that takes place.
Yeah, and that you can kind of have these with your client. You can just be like, I'm imagining, imagine it this way, what it must have been like in this kind of environment, where nothing about being lesbian ever exists. You're not, nothing about this is discussed. You don't see it in the media. All you know is being gay is bad. How in the world are you going to feel good about yourself when this is such an important part of who you are?
I want to, by way of maybe getting into your book, I want to ask you, a little bit, if it's okay, if you can say what you mean by lesbian, and then maybe you can get into your book,
Okay, great.
Lesbian Love Addiction. Because I think people don't know. I asked a client the other day, I said, what do you think gay means? It just came to me. And he went, no. I go, what do you mean? I never thought about it. I just am. I go, okay. I think it has to do with the fact that I live with a man. I went, okay, that's a start. But he hadn't really thought about it. So I thought it'd be good to ask you.
So lesbian, as I know it, originates through Sappho, who came from the island of Lesbos. So Sappho was a Greek poet, writer, I think she was a lot of things at the time, brilliant, and she wrote about her love of women. And she was called by Plato the ninth muse. I mean, she was very important in her time, and she definitely represents an archetype because she stayed with us for all these centuries. And so Sappho was the first woman poet that wrote about love in a specific poetic way that became very famous. It's very important. She invented it. And then it was about her love of women. And so that's where the name lesbian came from. Mm-hmm. And so what is it to be a lesbian? It is to be emotionally, erotically, romantically, and physically drawn to other women. Mm. And so it's the whole gamut, right? It's not just one piece of it, it's all of it. And what I found through my own exploration and working with others is it's in there, and it's a big part of who you are. And even if we try to repress it, it's like, it's way bigger than we are, right? So so that piece. So the other part of it is, I'm very much, I just say, nature nurture person. Right? So I don't think it's all nature, and I don't think it's all nurture. So it's, it's essentialism and social constructionism. So how do these two meet, right? Well, it happens all the time. So you come in with your own essential nature, your DNA mix, whatever it is, and then so you have this natural draw to same sex, right? In all these ways. And then you meet your nurture. And that social construction also impacts, semantics and identity and all of these different things. But the lesbian identity has that component. It also has the component of helping us create community, right? To find each other, and to be able to say, well, I don't know you, but your family. I'm connected to you because we have this identity that we share that's marginalized and of course deeply oppressed and all of these other things, but how can we connect to one another through this identity? And the lesbian word is particularly important because it's also helps fight misogyny, sexism, because when we were kind of mushed together with the gay men, we had lower numbers, men had male privilege, and we got super repressed. Our voice got oppressed, and no one was listening to, what the lesbians were saying back then. And they had to be separated. They had to find their own movement, their own group, their own identity, so that they could make their own impact, be heard, and there's a fieriness to it because even Jung talked about this, that those who lean to a sapphic, orientation are social justice oriented. So this piece of creating the own identity in the 70s was essential to getting that component out there, getting that organized. So identity helps us organize. When the sexologists were creating identities or sort of playing around, the scientists playing around with identities back in the mid 1800s, and no one had really looked at any of it. There was no way to organize or find each other until they started saying, oh well, some men are with men and some women are with women, and then through that was movement started to arise. So that's a really critical component as well, that, you know, I think those of us who believe in this so deeply don't want that to get lost.
Right.
In any of the sort of evolving of our community, which is ever evolving, which is great, you know, as well.
Right. I think it was beautiful, lyrical, historical, personal sort of testimony about what is identity. We need a lot more about it. You know, there was this political idea back in the day, maybe early 90s, late 80s, called identity politics. It got criticized as being too compartmentalizing, and I think with also the burgeoning of the letters in the LGBTQ plus community, some of the early formulations are maybe, you know, not as valued perhaps to a certain extent, although the lesbians at the AFIS were really well represented, I think. And so I felt really among a lot of lesbians there. So I think it's really important that you're saying, even as our community is growing, that the work done to understand and establish lesbian identity, which is so nicely formulated yourself, is so important.
So important. It's so important. And, you know, I understand, you know, I'm very mindful. I think a lot of it comes from being an Antiochian, and my first graduate program was all about knowing my white privilege and understanding, you know, different cultures and how they've been left out by our community, and there's been racism and bigotry within the community. And that I think, you know, some of the issues with some of the labels like lesbian comes from, you know, that it's a Western, you know, it's from Sappho's Greek, right? And the Greek didn't colonize, but they were colonized by the Romans, and then so sort of infiltrated into that culture that eventually became, you know,
the West, right?
The West, the Western civilization. So I see a lot of our infighting as our projection of our trauma. So I think, you know, as long as we can continue to do that healing, we'll be less antagonistic to each other.
Yes.
You know, it's sometimes really hard to even get involved in some sort of extroverted groups because there ends up being so much fighting. No one can agree on anything. And I just see there's this really unhealed trauma going on, and it becomes really counterproductive. And so, you know, for me, I'm just much more like, let's do the healing. Those of us that are trained and really drawn, called to this, let's do the healing so that folks can say, you know, all of these identities are important, and particularly some of them are really important for certain reasons. And yes, we want to look at the oppression and racism and pieces like that, but can we also kind of have conversations around that and not just go into like, it's all bad? Or it's all good, or like let's have those conversations, right?
This pivots, I think, us from maybe the extroverted political milieu or vibe that is characterized most of our movement, progress, and politics for the last several generations. And what you're saying, both in a subtle but very important way, is there's a movement towards, without losing the fieriness of activism, there's a movement towards responsibility, let's even say, but healing of our trauma. We didn't cause the trauma, but it's unfortunately our responsibility to deal with it. And you're talking a lot about that. I wonder if you could say more, but then maybe that's a way to segue into your book, which is all about healing.
Yeah, that's great. So I think, for me, yeah, of course, is any of this fair? No. But at the end of the day, I think being a human being is all about, like, how do you do your inner work, right? Like, it's a big part of why we're here. You know, it's like, so being an adult is like, yeah, okay, I was victimized, but I'm not a victim. And I need to own my trauma, and I need to heal my trauma, and I'm responsible for that. It's not my parents. It's not society.
Right.
It's not who's wronged me. It's like, I have to do that work. That's my responsibility. And it's very empowering to own that. Because then it's like, no, then you take back your control, right? So when you start doing the healing and you take responsibility for your reactions or overreactions or your projections, or like when you're triggered, finding out why, or, you know, when you start doing that work, your relationship with yourself and others makes dramatic shifts. And, you know, you can just change the trajectory of your life. You can also change how you are in the world and how you feel in the world. And that's, I think, essentially what we're all trying to do, is just, you know, the pursuit of happiness. That's really like the goal of human beings now, right? It really is, right? It's like and we have that at our disposal, but we can't do it if we don't own our stuff, our shadow, you know,
So that was, I really thought how trenchant that was. You said that very, very well, and I'm going to make a short about that one, what you just said. Let's talk, show us the book.
Okay, so here's my book.
What a beautiful, people really like the cover.
I'm so glad. I worked really hard to get this cover, just so you know. I wanted it, and I worked with my publishers about it, and then we reached out to the artist, and thankfully she was totally down with it.
That's great.
And so, I'm so glad that the cover really worked out, because it does. It's hard to miss.
It's
such a sexy photo. Oh my god. Oh my god. I love this photo. I love this photo. So, you know, this is very much, you know, the thing that's important is, like, that was initially my title, but, you know, this is how it ended up. They really wanted to work towards those with love addiction. But this is for any lesbian who has dysfunctional relationship patterns. Okay, so, and a lot of us get into that. Like, so what drew me to this is my own healing process. So I come out, I'm so excited, I'm starting having all the, you know, girlfriends, and each one is just a disaster. Disaster.
Yeah, I love how honest you are. Hello, everybody. Do you see that this clinical psychologist is being very honest here? That's great. And
I just kept getting really hurt. And so it really helped me take a deep dive into my own attachment style. Because when we were in graduate school, it was like coming around, but it wasn't like it is today, right? So it wasn't like we were all like, what's your attachment style?
No, we don't talk about it like this at all. This is a new thing.
Not at all. So like, I'm out there with this really insecure attachment style, and I'm really attracted to avoidance. And I'm getting myself into like all kinds of trouble, getting my heart broken pretty bad. And so for me, when I have a problem, I decide I gotta go fix it. So I was like, okay, I have this problem. It's a serious problem. I see the pattern. And I had an aha moment where I was like, wait a minute. I'm the common denominator here. I can keep finding fault with each of these girlfriends that have done such and such to me or what have you, but I keep picking this and falling into these traps, and I gotta figure out what's going on. Like, I can't, this is gonna destroy me. Like, you know, I can't keep doing this. So I took a deep dive into my own healing. I went to 2 different psychological retreats. I went into SLAA,
SLAA?
Sex and Love's Addicts Anonymous, and I really committed to that. And I read, like, you know, of course, a zillion books. And so part of my healing was writing this book. So someone had already come to me from the addiction community and said, there's no book for lesbians about sex addiction. And I said, look, Rob, it's not really, I mean, yes, can some lesbians have sex addiction? Sure, but I'm telling you, it's more love addiction. Like, this
I think that's more accurate.
Yeah, this is just not, you know, we have a different compulsion.
Yes.
So I was kind of thinking of writing this book, and, you know, I'd been sort of called to write this book, and then I really had, you know, I had to heal my issues. So part of my catharsis was writing the book. Wow. Part of my healing was writing the book.
What a wonderful thing that writing can do. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And I started like doing my own story, but I had to change the names because at the time, like, my stuff was really out there in my world, and so I couldn't bring folks in, you know, those who I dated. I didn't want to bring them into, you know, reality, you know, name them and stuff. So, but my story's in there, and so the bottom line is I get into the importance of lesbian identity.
Yes.
I get deeply into the attachment styles and how that gets,
right.
you know, how you can get into this very, very painful pattern. I get into internalized lesbian phobia. I get into all the components
Right.
of the pie that can create this issue.
Yes.
And then I get into the healing
Yes.
and the steps to take to really help yourself get better.
That's great. So it's kind of like, in a way, a road that leads to Rome, and then you're able to kind of really, in a way, it should be about, like lesbian love, and then it's really about lesbian love, actually.
It is. You're right. It is. Yeah. And so I hope that the title doesn't scare too many folks away, because it really is like so much grander than the addiction piece.
Yes, definitely.
And it's, and I think what was really important was when I was doing my own healing, every book was hetero-oriented, so it was always she, he. So there was no mirroring. I had to keep translating, and I said, I want a book that no one has to translate. She, all of that.
Right.
And
That's wonderful. What a great, I've never heard you talk about the book like that. It's very, very, very great. People can buy, and I'm going to put a link, by the way, on the description.
Oh, great. Okay,
So I'll put a
great.
link for it on the description. There'll be an Amazon link on the description. Buy it. It's really great. I think it'd be, we're good. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about this. We talked about the LGBT specialization, but maybe a little bit about how did we do it? What were we trying to do?
Yeah. So obviously we were really trying to teach future therapists about the affirmative approach. But what really became obvious over some time, it took a minute, and what was really interesting was the initiation that it took everyone on. So yes, we're doing this training, right? We're doing this amazing training. We're getting introduced to these incredible concepts, but what it did is the healing journey was incredible to watch, and it was a real immersion into their own healing. And even I saw that with the straight allies, like this initiation that they went into. It was so fascinating to watch, because they're like, oh yes, I'm very interested in the LGBTQ community, so I'm gonna take this specialization. And then they go on this journey of like total transformation.
It's a remarkable program. I think that a lot of classes in LGBTQ that we see, and I don't want to make broad generalizations, but there's a certain way one can teach about these things that are slightly more didactic. The things you need to know, the words you need to know, the terms you need to know, the books you need to read. And then there's this other thing you're discussing, which is to go through an initiation where you face your demons, even if you're an ally.
Right.
That's a really important point.
And then you come out the other end transformed. So we were talking today about heroes, right? You were saying that introduction, like, we're all on our heroine's journey, and that this specialization takes you through that journey for sure, which was what was so fabulous to watch. And I think as, creators of it all, you leading, being our fearless leader, and us being, all these co-creators, like we were in our own initiation, a little different because we were also, presenting and teaching and everything, but there was a huge initiation that went on as well for all of us. And I think the classes are amazing. For me, of course, my two favorite classes: the history, LGBT history and math,
which you did a lot to create.
Yes, I did a lot to create, and a lot of it came from my dissertation and my own deep dive into like, how did we get here? How did this Western civilization get so awful about sexuality, particularly female sexuality? But I could bring in all of these things I had discovered by uncovering all of this, and then the lesbian identity, of course, was also so
you did
wonderful.
A lot. I wonder if it would make sense to maybe mention a little bit about Sandra too.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah. Because I think that would, in a way, you became the person directing us to feminism, to lesbian identity, to greater diversity. It was so important that a woman was, one of the major organizers and engineers of the specialization. But we also we knew Sandra, and she was also a lesbian too. So maybe we should mention her a little bit.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, it's I was starting to write my second book, and I was feeling really blocked, and I realized that I was not calling in her enough, because she was so important, and her life was just shortened and really quite abruptly, but she had definitely become a mentor of mine, as the formation of the specialization was kind of in this still conception phase. And her fierceness and her fieriness around feminism and being a lesbian and like being so in love with being a lesbian and also having a really powerful Jungian perspective. Like she was so creative. I mean, I have a different way, so I didn't bring it in the way that she would have. If she had not passed away and been one of the co-creators, it would have gone in a bit of a different direction for sure, because we're different in a lot of ways. So I was always extremely taken by and really drawn to her deep analysis and Jungian perspective on being a lesbian, not just the identity, but just like being a lesbian. Right. Just the beingness of it. The archetypal aspects, the deep feeling parts of it, and she was brilliant, and it was a huge loss. Yes. It was a huge loss, and I'm very thankful to her. I think of her often.
Well, that's great. Me too. I'm so glad we're evoking her. Although I have one of her beautiful paintings in the hallway, and one of her talkers in my.
I have one of her talkers in my room too.
Oh wow, yeah, that's cool. And maybe for the folks who are interested in learning more about Sandra, I will put links to her YouTubes in the description section.
Yes, those are
There's about 4 or 5 of them.
Yes, and they're really good. I mean, what was also amazing about Sandra was she was very transparent and vulnerable, and she would just talk about like, I'm really nervous right now. And, part of that's because, I have this internalized homophobia, and I don't feel good about myself, and I shouldn't be standing here, and
She was that way in the YouTube videos. People can check it out.
Exactly.
Definitely. I love drawing people's attention to that. Well, I think we could do many, many more interesting conversations about different kinds of things. Maybe we can wrap up for here.
Sounds good.
But I wanted, as a call to action, I want you to tell people if they want to get a hold of you, how to and then it might be good to know what kind of book you're working on right now.
Okay. So call to action is, I have a therapy center with my wife, Vanessa. So I solved my relationship issues. I met an amazing woman, and we've been together 9 years. Like that, you have to know how big a deal that is. I never got past 2.5, so like 9 years. Like I'm still like, whoa! I'm like with someone for 9 years. It's amazing. And it's not been easy. Like solving the I really want to be clear about this. Solving my dysfunctional relationship patterns didn't mean that I knew how to be in a relationship at all. So that's been a whole other journey that we can have another conversation around another time. Very powerful, and I'm excited that we've really worked it out, and we're at a place where we're really good, and that's been work as well. So that's another conversation. But we have a therapy center. We have 7 therapists that work with us. I do a lot of affirmative training. We do anti-racist training. We take some insurances. So that's www.awakentherapycenter.com. Then I have my own personal website, drlaurencostine.com. And then I have a landing page for the book, lesbian-love-addiction.com. And that also has some information like blogs, resources, and a course that I created that's, if you want a little bit more help dealing with your dysfunctional relationship patterns, the course is very much directed towards what's going on and how can we help you change all of that. And so, yeah, those are the three things that I've
that's
got going.
fantastic.
Yeah, and then the book, I'm working on a self-actualization book for lesbians and queer women and non-binary folks. So it's going to be kind of like, it's another book like this of like, if you're really finding areas in your life that aren't working, you're dissatisfied, you're just not quite finding that happiness and internal liberation. It's going to be a whole book about that. It's going to be all focused on our community. It's going to be she, it's going to be, or she, they, and it's going to be talking about internalized lesbian phobia. It's going to be talking about heterosexism. It's going to be talking about how to heal this trauma. It's going to be really, a deep dive and all of that. And also the very complex relationship with our moms.
It's so important. Oh, I'm so interested and can't wait to hear more about that. Maybe you'll give us little snippets over time. I think before we end, everybody has been waiting and even wondering and curious about our little friend. So it might be interesting for you to introduce your little friend.
So this is Shempa. She is a therapy dog, and she loves clients that come in person. And her name means, it's Tibetan Buddhism for the emotional hook. It's called Shempa with an N. Shempa.
Oh, that's a beautiful way to end. Thank you so much, Shempa and Dr. Lauren.
Thank you
for talking with us. And everybody, if you want to know more, please don't forget to smash that like button and hit the subscribe for more interesting YouTubes. And also, I will put a lot of Dr. Lauren's information in the description section. Her book to buy, her website, the therapy website, and also the landing page too.
Thank you so much, Dr. Doug. It's a pleasure as always to be with you.
Yay. Talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.